In the heart of the sprawling desert world of Velara, where twin suns scorched golden dunes by day and silver moons cast long shadows over crystalline spires by night, stood the royal palace of Zarkale, a fortress of living stone that pulsed with ancient energy and whispered secrets in a language only the wind understood. Within its opalescent halls, Queen Lyra Voss, sovereign of the Caliph Dominion, ruled with grace forged in fire and sorrow etched into the violet hue of her skin. Her hair, white as comet dust and shimmering like starlight caught in silk, flowed past her waist, framing eyes that held galaxies of grief and wisdom. She had lost much during the War of Shattered Skies, her mate, her fleet, nearly her people, but never her resolve. And never, she thought, would she allow vulnerability to breach the walls around her heart again. Yet fate, ever mischievous, had other plans, and it arrived not in armor or starship, but in the quiet steadiness of a human guard named Joran. Joran wasn't supposed to be here. He'd been part of the Terran peacekeeping corps assigned to monitor ceasefire compliance after the brutal conflict between the Caliph and the rogue Draken Syndicate. Lean, sun-browned, and unassuming, with calloused hands and a dry wit that often baffled his alien comrades. He'd drawn the short straw for palace duty, a posting most humans considered ceremonial at best, humiliating at worst. But Joran didn't mind. He liked the silence of the outer courtyards, the way the desert wind sang through the obsidian arches, and the curious glances from the palace's young inhabitants, especially one small figure who watched him from behind marble pillars with wide, luminous eyes the color of twilight. Her name was Naira, barely 8 cycles old by Caliph reckoning, roughly 10 Earth years. She was the queen's only child, born under a blood moon just weeks before her father perished in orbit above their homeworld. Naira had inherited her mother's purple skin and ethereal white hair, but her spirit was something else entirely, bright, impulsive, and endlessly curious about the soft-skinned human who patrolled the eastern gardens with such gentle precision. At first, Joran merely nodded when she peeked out from behind ferns or statues. Then came the day she dropped from a low-hanging vine directly into his path, landing with a puff of sand and a giggle that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "You don't walk like the others," she'd said, tilting her head. "You look at the ground like it might speak." Joran, startled but amused, knelt. "Maybe it does. You just have to listen." From that moment, an unlikely friendship bloomed. Naira began appearing during his shifts, not as a royal heir, but as a child hungry for stories, laughter, and the simple joy of being seen without expectation. Joran taught her how to skip stones across the palace's reflective pools, showed her how to tie knots with earth rope, and once, during a sandstorm that rattled the palace windows, stayed with her in the library while she trembled beneath a blanket. He didn't know it then, but Naira had nightmares. Visions of warships exploding, of her father's voice cutting off mid-transmission. The palace healers offered sedatives. Her tutors offered discipline. But Joran, he offered presence. He sat beside her, humming an old Terran lullaby his own father used to sing, until her breathing slowed and her small fingers curled trustingly around his thumb. Weeks turned to months. Naira began leaving little gifts on his patrol route. Polished desert gems, hand-drawn maps of secret tunnels, once even a clumsily woven bracelet made of moonvine fibers. She called him Guardian Joran at first, then simply Joran. And then one evening as they sat watching the twin suns dip below the horizon, she leaned against his shoulder and murmured, "Father!" The word hung in the air like a struck bell. Joran froze, his breath catching. He looked down at her, but Naira was already asleep, her head resting against his arm, her expression peaceful for the first time in memory. He didn't correct her. How could he? In that moment, she needed someone to be steady, to be safe, and if calling him father gave her that comfort, then so be it. He carried her back to her chambers, tucking her beneath silken sheets, and returned to his post with a heart both heavier and lighter than before. But secrets in a royal palace are never truly secret. Queen Lyra had noticed the change in her daughter. Naira's nightmares lessened. Her laughter returned. She spoke of Joran, with a warmth that hadn't touched her voice since her father's death. First, the queen was grateful. Perhaps this human, despite his softness and strange customs, was good for Naira. But gratitude curdled into suspicion when she overheard a servant whispering about the child calling the guard, "Father." The word struck Lyra like a plasma bolt to the chest. How dare he? How dare this outsider, this temporary fixture in their world, presume to fill a role sacred beyond measure? One evening, as Joran stood watch near the celestial garden, a place where the bones of Caliph ancestors were said to sleep beneath flowering crystal trees, Queen Lyra appeared before him, flanked by 2 silent honor guards whose armor gleamed like frozen lightning. Her posture was regal, her expression unreadable, but her eyes burned with controlled fury. "Why?" she began, her voice low and resonant, each syllable sharpened by centuries of royal authority. "Does my daughter call you father, human?" Joran didn't flinch. He met her gaze evenly, though his pulse hammered against his ribs. "I don't know, Your Majesty," he said honestly. She said it once when she was half asleep. "I never encouraged it. I never claimed it." "You stand too close to her," Lyra countered, stepping forward. "You speak to her as if you were kin. You carry her when she stumbles. You stay with her during storms. Do you think I haven't seen?" Her voice cracked, just slightly, betraying the raw nerve beneath the ice. "She lost her father in fire and silence. Do you understand what it means to replace that memory with yours?" "I'm not replacing anyone," Joran said softly. "I'm just there, when she needs someone. And that is precisely the danger," Lyra snapped, her composure fracturing. "You offer kindness without consequence, comfort without commitment. You will leave when your tour ends, and she will be left with another ghost." The words stung because they were true. Joran's assignment was temporary. He'd known that from the start. But standing there, under the watchful eyes of ancient stars and a grieving queen, he realized something deeper. He didn't want to leave. Not yet. Not while Naira still looked at him like he was home. Before he could respond, alarms blared through the palace. A deep, guttural wail that signaled breach. Red emergency lights pulsed along the corridors. The honor guards snapped to attention, weapons materializing from their bracers. Lyra's face hardened instantly, shifting from wounded mother to warrior queen. "Draken infiltrators," she hissed. "They've breached the lower vaults." Joran didn't hesitate. "Where's Naira?" "In the skyward suite," Lyra said, already moving. "Under guard." But Joran was already sprinting, his boots pounding against the polished stone. He knew the palace layout better than most. He'd walked every corridor, memorized every blind spot. As he rounded a corner, he saw them. 3 Draken mercenaries, clad in black bio armor, dragging a struggling Naira between them. Her small fists beat against their arms, her white hair tangled, her eyes wide with terror. "Let her go!" Joran roared, drawing his sidearm. A standard-issue pulse pistol, woefully underpowered against Draken shielding. One mercenary laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "Human fool, this brat's worth more alive than dead. Step aside, or we'll melt your bones where you stand." Naira screamed, "Joran, don't let them take me." That scream shattered something in him. He fired, not at the mercenaries, but at the ceiling conduit above them. Sparks rained down, and the emergency sprinkler system activated, dousing the corridor in conductive coolant. The Draken armor shorted momentarily, their shields flickering. It was all the opening Joran needed. He lunged, tackling the nearest mercenary, driving his elbow into the weak joint at the neck seal. The alien crumpled with a choked gasp. The second swung a vibroblade. Joran dodged, but not fast enough. The blade grazed his ribs, searing pain lancing through his side. He gritted his teeth, rolled, and kicked the third mercenary's knee sideways. Bone cracked. The alien howled, but the leader recovered quickly, raising a plasma caster. "You die now, Softskin." Just then, a blast of violet energy tore through the wall beside them. Queen Lyra stood in the breach, her royal staff glowing with lethal power, her eyes blazing with maternal fury. "Touch my child again," she snarled, "and I will unmake your soul atom by atom." The remaining mercenaries hesitated, just long enough for palace guards to flood the corridor. Within moments, the fight was over. The Draken were subdued, bound in energy restraints, their faces masks of disbelief. They hadn't expected the queen herself to intervene, or a human to fight like a cornered beast for a child not his own. Lyra rushed to Naira, gathering her daughter into her arms, whispering soothing words in the old tongue. But Naira's eyes searched past her, locking onto Joran as he slumped against the wall, clutching his bleeding side. "Joran!" she cried, wriggling free. She ran to him, tears streaking her purple cheeks. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he managed, forcing a smile. "Just a scratch." Naira threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "Don't leave me," she sobbed. "Please don't leave me." And then, loud enough for everyone to hear, she whispered, "Father!" Silence fell over the corridor. Even the crackle of damaged conduits seemed to hush. Queen Lyra stood frozen, watching her daughter cling to the human who had just risked his life for her. The anger in her eyes softened, replaced by something far more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or reluctant awe. Later, in the palace infirmary, as medics stitched Joran's wound with biothread and applied healing gel that smelled of crushed mint and ozone, Queen Lyra entered alone. She dismissed the attendants with a wave of her hand and stood at the foot of his bed, her expression unreadable. "You fought like a caliph," she said finally. "I fought like a man who couldn't lose a daughter," he replied quietly. Lyra looked away, her fingers tracing the edge of her royal sash. "Naira hasn't called anyone father since the funeral pyres cooled, not even in dreams. And yet, she says it to you as if it were truth." "She's lonely," Joran said, "and scared, and I couldn't bear to see her afraid." "You are not her father," Lyra said, but there was no accusation in her voice now, only sorrow. Her father was a star-forged warrior, a poet of battle hymns, a man who sang to her while planets burned. "You are a guard, a human, temporary." "Maybe," Joran admitted, "but right now she needs someone who stays, not someone who sings of burning planets, but someone who sits with her in the dark." "Isn't that what a father does too?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. She walked to the window, gazing out at the endless desert bathed in moonlight. "The Caliph believed that souls choose their families across lifetimes," she said softly. "Sometimes the bond isn't blood, it's choice, sacrifice, presence." She turned back to him, her eyes glistening. "You chose her, even knowing you might leave, even knowing it would hurt." "I didn't choose to leave," Joran said. "I chose to stay as long as I could." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the healing lamps. Then, to his astonishment, Queen Lyra stepped forward and took his hand, her touch cool and smooth, like polished amethyst. "Do not be afraid," she said, echoing the very words Naira had once whispered to him during a nightmare. "You have done what no one else dared. You have given her safety, and in doing so, you have given me hope." From that night on, Joran's role changed. No longer just a guard, he was granted the title of Shield of the Air, a ceremonial but deeply honored position in Caliph culture, reserved for those who had proven their loyalty beyond doubt. He continued his patrols, but now Naira walked beside him openly, her small hand tucked in his, her laughter ringing through the halls like a promise. Yet the political winds shifted. The Draken Syndicate, humiliated by their failed kidnapping, demanded reparations. Rumors spread of a larger invasion brewing in the Outer Rim. And within the palace, whispers grew louder. A human holding influence over the air? Unthinkable. Dangerous. Some nobles called for Joran's removal. Others suggested a more permanent solution. Marriage, perhaps, to bind the human to their world irrevocably. Queen Lyra heard it all. And though she said nothing, she began to watch Joran differently. Not just as Naira's protector, but as a man who carried quiet strength in his bones and kindness in his silence. One evening, as they stood together on the Starfall balcony overlooking the capital city's glittering sprawl, she asked, "Would you stay, Joran? If you could?" He looked at her, then at Naira playing below with a flock of luminescent sky moths. "I already have," he said, and somewhere in the vast, indifferent cosmos, a new family began to form. Not by blood, not by decree, but by the quiet, stubborn act of choosing each other, again and again, beneath the twin suns of a desert world that had once known only war. Weeks passed, and the fragile peace within the palace deepened into something richer, something that felt less like duty and more like belonging. Joran trained with the royal guard not as an outsider, but as one of their own, his human reflexes surprisingly complementary to Caliph combat styles. Naira blossomed under his steady presence, her nightmares fading into distant echoes, replaced by dreams of flying sky moths and desert treasure hunts. Even Queen Lyra began to join them during evening walks in the celestial garden, her regal stiffness softening into something almost conversational. She asked him about Earth, its oceans, its seasons, its strange customs of celebrating birthdays with sugared cakes. He told her stories of snow, which she found impossible to believe until he showed her a hollow recording on his wrist pad. She laughed then, a sound so rare it made the garden crystals hum in resonance. But peace, especially in the aftermath of war, is rarely allowed to settle. The first twist came not from outside enemies, but from within the Caliph court itself. Lord Vexcor, High Chancellor and cousin to the late king, had long coveted the throne. With no male heir and a queen whose grief had once made her seem vulnerable, he'd bided his time. Now, seeing Lyra's growing trust in a human, and worse, seeing Nyra's attachment to him, he saw weakness. An opportunity. He struck subtly at first. Whispers in council chambers. A human shapes the heir's mind. Leaked reports to the planetary press. Terran Guard oversteps. Queen blind to foreign influence. Then came the formal accusation. During a full conclave of the Royal Synod, Vexcor rose and declared Joran a security risk, citing emotional manipulation of the Crown Princess and potential espionage ties to Terran Command. Lyra's face remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened around the arms of her throne. "Present your evidence," she commanded. Vexcor smiled thinly. "Evidence? The child calls him father. She clings to him like kin. Is that not unnatural? Is that not dangerous?" Joran stood at attention near the chamber doors, his expression neutral, though his stomach churned. He knew better than to speak unless addressed, but Nyra, seated beside her mother, did not share that restraint. "He saved my life," she shouted, leaping to her feet. Her voice, still young but ringing with unexpected authority, silenced the murmuring nobles. "When the Draken came, you all hid in your vaults. He fought them alone. He bled for me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. "And if calling him father makes me feel safe, then I'll say it 1,000 times. A stunned silence followed. No one had ever seen the princess defy protocol so openly. Queen Lyra looked at her daughter, not with anger, but with dawning realization. This wasn't just affection. It was loyalty, and loyalty in the Caliph tradition was sacred. Still, Vexcor pressed. "Sentiment clouds judgment, Your Majesty. The law is clear. Any non-Caliph with undue influence over the heir must be removed, or bound by blood." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "The ancient right," Vexcor said smoothly. "If a foreigner is deemed essential to the royal line, they may be formally adopted into the bloodline through the bonding ceremony. But such a bond requires reciprocity." He paused, letting the implication hang. "It requires marriage to a member of the royal house." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Everyone knew what he meant. There was only one eligible royal female, Queen Lyra herself. Joran's blood ran cold. Marriage? To the queen? It wasn't just absurd, it was politically explosive. He glanced at Lyra, expecting outrage. But to his shock, she didn't dismiss the idea outright. Instead, she studied him, really studied him, as if seeing him for the first time not as a guard, not as Nyra's protector, but as a man. The second twist arrived 3 nights later, not in words, but in fire. An explosion rocked the eastern wing of the palace, targeted, precise. Not a Draken attack this time, but sabotage from within. The blast destroyed the ancestral archives, including the original scrolls of the bonding ceremony. More critically, it damaged the palace's core energy matrix, plunging entire sectors into darkness. In the chaos, Nyra vanished. Joran found her missing from her chambers, her bed untouched. A single skymoth pendant left on the pillow, the one he'd carved for her from moonvine wood. Panic clawed at his throat, but he forced it down. Think, who benefits? He raced to the lower levels, following faint scuff marks on the floor, the scent of ozone and burnt wiring. Deep in the sublevels, where the old war tunnels lay forgotten, he found her bound, gagged, but alive, guarded by 2 cloaked figures speaking in hushed Caliph dialects. And standing over them, arms crossed, was Lord Vexcor. "You're persistent, human," Vexcor sneered. "But this ends now. The girl will be rescued by loyalists tomorrow, after the Queen signs emergency powers over to me. A tragic incident, requiring strong leadership." Joran didn't answer. He moved like shadow and storm. Years of military training fused with raw desperation. He disarmed the first guard with a nerve strike, used the second's momentum to slam him into a support beam. Vexcor drew a ceremonial dagger, more symbol than weapon, but Joran was already on him, pinning him against the wall with one arm across his throat. "Where's the exit?" Joran growled. Vexcor spat. "You think this changes anything? Even if you return her, the Synod will demand the bonding. And you, a human married to our queen? The people will revolt." "Maybe," Joran said, tightening his grip, "or maybe they'll see a man who protects their future." He knocked Vexcor unconscious with a precise blow to the temple, scooped up Nyra, and carried her through the labyrinthine tunnels toward the surface. She clung to him, trembling but silent, her trust absolute. Back in the palace, chaos reigned. Queen Lyra, frantic with fear, had mobilized every guard. When Joran emerged from a hidden stairwell with Nyra in his arms, the entire courtyard fell silent. Lyra ran to them, dropping to her knees, pulling her daughter into a crushing embrace. "You came back," she whispered, tears streaming down her violet cheeks. "I always come back," Joran said simply. That night, in the privacy of the Queen's solarium, Lyra summoned Joran. The stars glittered overhead through the transparent dome, casting silver light on her white hair. "Vexcor spoke truth about one thing," she said, her voice low. "The bonding ceremony is real, and if we do not act, others will use Nyra's affection for you as a weapon. They will paint you as a usurper, a spy, a corrupter." She turned to face him fully. "But there is another way." Joran braced himself. "The ceremony doesn't require marriage to me," she continued, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. That was Vexcor's lie. The ancient texts, before they were destroyed, stated clearly, a foreign guardian may be bound to the heir as adoptive sire, a role equal to father in all but biology. No marriage, only oath. Relief flooded Joran, followed immediately by confusion. "Then why did he say?" "Because he wanted me compromised," Lyra said bitterly. "A queen bound to a human husband would be seen as weak. But a queen who names a loyal guardian as her daughter's adoptive father? That is strength. That is wisdom." She stepped closer. "But the ceremony requires consent, from you, from Nyra, and from me, and it cannot be undone. Once sworn, you are Caliph in spirit, if not in blood. You would never leave, not even if Earth called you home." Joran looked out at the desert stretching endlessly beyond the palace walls. He thought of his old life, drifting from post to post, never staying long enough to matter. And then he thought of Nyra's laughter, of Lyra's quiet strength, of the way the palace stones seemed to hum when he walked them now, as if welcoming him. "I'm already home," he said. The ceremony took place at dawn beneath the Heartstone spire, where the first Caliph queen had sworn her oath to the stars. Nyra wore robes woven with threads of comet silk, her small hands clasped tightly around Joran's. Lyra presided, her voice resonant as she recited the ancient words. "By blood unshared but spirit entwined, by choice made true and fear left behind, let this bond be sealed in starlight and sand, father and daughter, hand within hand." As the final syllable echoed, the Heartstone glowed violet, and a pulse of energy swept through the courtyard. Nyra threw her arms around Joran's waist. "Father," she said, beaming. He knelt, cupping her face in his hands. "Always." But just as the crowd began to cheer, a new alarm blared, not from within the palace, but from orbit. A Terran fleet had entered Caliph space without clearance, and at its helm, Admiral Corwin Rell, Joran's former commanding officer, and a man known for his ruthless pragmatism. Lyra's face darkened. "Why would your people come here now?" Joran's stomach dropped. He knew why. During his early days on Valara, he discovered something buried beneath the desert. A crashed Terran scout ship from the war, carrying classified data on Caliph energy cores. He'd reported it, but buried the coordinates, fearing what Earth might do with that knowledge. Someone must have found it. "They're not here for peace," Joran said grimly. "They're here for power." The third twist was the cruelest yet. Admiral Rell demanded an audience. When he strode into the throne room, flanked by armored marines, his eyes locked onto Joran with cold recognition. "Sergeant Joran," he said, "you've been busy, playing house with aliens while ignoring direct orders." "I followed my conscience, sir," Joran replied evenly. "Conscience doesn't win wars," Rell snapped. Then, turning to Lyra, he smiled, a predator's smile. "Your Majesty, we've come to retrieve what's ours. That includes the energy core schematics, and your pet human." Lyra rose, her aura crackling with restrained power. "Joran is under Caliph protection. He is the adoptive sire of my heir. Touch him, and you declare war on my world." Rell chuckled. "War? You're still recovering from your last one. And Earth? We've got fleets ready to glass this desert if you refuse." Tension thickened the air. Nyra clutched Joran's arm, her eyes wide with fear. But then, something unexpected happened. From the shadows of the throne room, a figure emerged. Lord Vexcor, bruised but alive, escorted by royal guards. He bowed deeply to Lyra. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough but sincere. I saw ambition where there was only loyalty. This human, he didn't take our princess. He gave her back her heart. He turned to Rel. And if Earth thinks it can threaten Velara while we stand united, then let them try. A murmur of agreement rose from the assembled nobles. Even those who had doubted Joran now stood firm. Rel's smile vanished. You're making a mistake. No, Lyra said, stepping forward, Joran and Naira at her side. We're making a family. The standoff lasted 3 tense days. But then, news arrived from the Outer Rim. The Draken Syndicate, sensing weakness, had launched a full-scale assault on Terran border colonies. Earth needed every ship it had. Rel withdrew, but not before locking eyes with Joran one last time. This isn't over. Perhaps it wasn't. But as the Terran fleet vanished into the void, Joran stood on the Starfall balcony with Naira on his shoulders and Lyra beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The desert wind carried the scent of blooming night flowers, and somewhere in the distance, a sky moth chimed. He wasn't just a guard anymore. He wasn't just a soldier. He was father, protector, belonging, and in the vast, indifferent cosmos, that was the rarest kind of victory. Continue and end in satisfying happy ending. 3:31 p.m. Years flowed like desert winds across the dunes of Velara, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, but always carrying the scent of change. The war with the Draken Syndicate ended not with annihilation, but with uneasy truce, brokered in part by Queen Lyra's newfound alliance with reformed fringe systems and, quietly, by Joran's backchannel diplomacy with Terran moderates who'd grown weary of endless conflict. Earth, humbled by its own losses and the revelation that Caliph energy cores were symbiotic with living consciousness, not weapons to be plundered, retreated from its imperial ambitions in this sector. Admiral Rel was reassigned to a remote asteroid monitoring post, his influence waning like a dying star. Within the palace walls, life bloomed in ways no one had foreseen. Joran never returned to Earth. He didn't need to. Velara had become his world, not by decree, but by choice and by love. The title adoptive sire evolved into something deeper, something spoken not just in ceremony, but in daily life. Naira, now 12 by Caliph reckoning, walked beside him not as a princess guarded, but as a daughter cherished. She learned to fight with twin energy blades under his tutelage, though she preferred tinkering with skymoth drones or sketching constellations in her journal. And every night, without fail, she still slipped into his quarters for their ritual. Hot spiced nectar, a story from Earth or old Caliph myth, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone would always be there when the nightmares dared return. But the greatest surprise came not from Naira, but from Lyra. It began subtly, shared glances during council meetings that lingered a heartbeat too long, her hand brushing his when passing scrolls. The way she'd pause mid-sentence if he entered the room, as if his presence reset the rhythm of her thoughts. At first, Joran dismissed it as gratitude, or perhaps the natural bond forged through shared parenthood. But then came the evening of the Twin Moons Festival, when the entire palace gathered beneath the open sky to honor ancestors and new beginnings. Naira, ever the instigator, tugged Joran toward the central fire pit, where couples danced in spirals of light and shadow. "You should dance with Mother," she said bluntly, eyes gleaming with mischief. Joran nearly choked on his drink. "Your mother? She wouldn't. She watches you," Naira whispered, suddenly serious. "When you teach me to throw knives. When you fix the garden irrigation. When you sit alone at dawn, looking at the stars. She watches. Like she's memorizing you." Before he could respond, music swelled. A deep, resonant melody played on crystal harps and desert drums. And there, in the center of the circle, stood Queen Lyra, her violet skin glowing in the firelight, her white hair unbound and flowing like liquid moonlight. She held out her hand, not as a queen, not as a ruler, as a woman. Heart-pounding, Joran stepped forward. Their hands met, hers cool and smooth, his calloused and warm, and they moved together in the ancient spiral dance, steps unfamiliar yet perfectly synchronized, as if their bodies remembered a rhythm their minds had only just discovered. Around them, nobles whispered, but Naira beamed, clapping along with the beat. That night changed everything. No grand declaration was made, no political announcement issued, but slowly, surely, the palace adjusted to a new truth. The human guard and the alien queen were walking side by side, not just as co-parents, but as partners. They debated policy over breakfast, sparred in the training yard. Lyra always won, but Joran made her laugh harder than any warrior ever had. and sat together in silence during sandstorms, watching lightning crackle over the dunes. 5 years after the bonding ceremony, beneath the same Heartstone spire where vows had once been sworn, a new ceremony took place, one not of adoption but of union. There was no fanfare, no galactic broadcast, just family, close friends, and the whispering stones of Velara bearing witness. Joran wore a simple tunic woven with threads of comet silk and Terran cotton. Lyra's gown shimmered with embedded stardust that pulsed gently with her heartbeat. Nyra stood as their bond witness, tears in her eyes as she placed matching rings of fused desert iron and earth steel on their fingers. "You chose us," she told them both, voice trembling. "Now we choose you together." And so they were. Peace did not mean idleness. Joran became head of royal security, redesigning the palace defenses with a blend of Terran tech and Caliph bioarchitecture that made Velara impregnable. Lyra, freed from the weight of solitary rule, focused on rebuilding alliances, founding schools that taught both human and Caliph history, and, most unexpectedly, writing poetry again, something she hadn't done since her mate's death. Their shared quarters filled with books, mismatched mugs, and the sound of laughter echoing down corridors once haunted by silence. Then came the children. Not just Nyra, who remained their first and fiercest joy, but 3 more, twin boys born during a solar eclipse, their skin a soft lavender hue and their hair streaked with silver white, and a youngest daughter with Joran's stubborn chin and Lyra's star-filled eyes. The palace, once a monument to loss, became a home alive with running feet, spilled nectar, and bedtime arguments over which planet had more moons. Joran never stopped being a soldier, but now, his battles were fought in council chambers and schoolyards, teaching his children that strength lay not in conquest, but in compassion. He showed his sons how to mend a broken drone and his daughters how to stand tall when bullies mocked their mixed heritage. And every evening, without fail, he gathered all 4 beneath the starfall balcony, pointing out constellations, telling stories of Earth oceans and Caliph sky moths, reminding them that family wasn't about blood alone. It was about who showed up, day after day, heart in hand. Lyra, once feared as the Ice Queen of the Shattered Skies, became known across the galaxy as the Mother of Unity. Her reign ushered in an era of unprecedented cooperation between species, her wisdom tempered by the grounded humanity Joran brought into her life. And in private moments, when the children slept and the twin suns dipped below the horizon, she would rest her head on his shoulder and whisper, "You gave me back my future." One evening, decades later, an elderly Joran sat in the celestial garden, his hair now streaked with gray, his hands gnarled but steady. Around him, grandchildren played, some purple-skinned, some fair, all laughing in a language that blended Terran idioms with Caliph song. Nyra, now a diplomat in her own right, knelt beside him, placing a cup of spiced nectar in his hands. "They're naming a new peace academy after you," she said softly. "The Joran Lyra Institute for Cross-Species Understanding." He chuckled. "Tell them to name it after your mother. She did all the hard work." "She says you were the spark," Nyra replied, smiling. "The human who loved us enough to stay." From the palace doorway, Lyra appeared, her white hair now silver, her violet skin lined with age but her eyes still bright with galaxies. She walked slowly, leaning on a staff carved with symbols of Earth and Velara intertwined. She settled beside Joran, taking his free hand in hers. "Remember when you asked me why Nyra called you father?" she murmured. He nodded. "I thought I'd lose everything that day." "You gained everything," she corrected gently. "As did we." Above them, the twin suns set in a blaze of gold and crimson, casting long shadows over the garden, where bones once slept and love now grew. Sky moths drifted lazily through the air, chiming softly like distant bells. And in that moment, surrounded by family, home, and peace hard-won and deeply cherished, Joran knew with absolute certainty that he had found not just a new world, but his truest self. They lived not just peacefully, but joyfully, not just as survivors but as builders. And when their time finally came, centuries later, they passed not in sorrow, but in each other's arms, their legacy carried forward in the laughter of children who bore the best of both worlds in their hearts. And somewhere, in the quiet hum of the palace stones, the wind still sang their names, human and Caliph, father and queen, husband and wife, forever entwined beneath the endless stars.